As Michael said, I'm in the third year of my PhD program. I'm in a consortium of 4 universities at the University of Kent in England, at Eötvös Loránd University in Hungary, University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, and University of Hamburg in Germany. And my PhD is in Cultural and Global Criminology, where we look very critically on what crime means and how crime is implemented in different places. It's a fantastic doctoral program. It's fully funded. I'm the mouthpiece for selling it. So if you think you or anyone you know is interested in participating in this doctoral program, possibly, there's some flyers in the back, and I'm happy to talk to you afterwards, or you can contact me about it. So there's a spiel for my doctoral program. Thank you all for coming out, by the way. I know some of you are at work right now, or you've traveled, so I really appreciate taking time out of your day to come and listen to me speak. Also, thank you to CARBC for setting this up. This is really great, and it's nice to be back here as a presenter rather than a student now. So today I thought I would share some of my experiences from the research I conducted for my PhD, where I was in collaboration with the Harm Reduction Center in Budapest in Hungary, which is in Central Europe. So the title of this presentation, Chicks on the Corner, comes from the title of a public photo exhibition and a fundraiser that occurred at the output of this participatory photography research that I conducted over an 8-month period from 2013 to 2014. So in this presentation, I'll first provide a brief overview of the research setting so you can get a feel of where the context was and what conditions I was working in and with the people I was working with. And then I'll show you different photographs that were produced from the participants and explain how this type of data can help in terms of understanding harm production and harm reduction in the context of a Women's Only Day syringe exchange program. What I'm particularly interested about as someone who used to live in Victoria is whether any of these issues and potential solutions that come up through this data, if any of them are relevant to your practice or issues or solutions you see in Victoria, the island, or even in British Columbia, especially with marginalized populations like First Nations people. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts after the presentation if you see any comparison between the two. So my research question, my central research question was, how is harm and harm reduction as concepts understood in the lives of clients and workers of a women's only syringe exchange program? So my thought was, if participants are given cameras, how do they choose to document these concepts through their own eyes rather than me going in and asking them and interpreting them myself? I also am curious if there's broader understandings of harm and harm reduction beyond the traditional public health model of harm reduction in response to illicit injectable drugs. And as I am interested in gender, as Michael said, I wonder if any of these responses are gendered in any way. So at the stage of my PhD right now, as I'm writing up my findings and trying to kind of work through whether, in fact, they are gendered, in what ways, etc. So I assume that most people here probably know something about harm reduction, as I know it's a popular method in British Columbia, which is fantastic. It's not in Hungary, unfortunately, but I'll just go through briefly what harm reduction is. So this is a quote from Harm Reduction International, which is a London-based charity NGO that does a lot of advocacy work with harm reduction internationally. The quote is, "Harm reduction refers to policies, programs, and practices that aim primarily to reduce the adverse health, social, and economic consequences of the use of legal and illegal psychoactive drugs without necessarily reducing drug consumption." And there's obviously a range of methods and ways and techniques that harm reduction can be implemented. Syringe exchange programs are what I'm primarily focused on and what I was focused on for my research. And the thought there is that if people are injecting drugs, they potentially will share needles because they're afraid of getting new needles because of stigmatization, going to the pharmacist, etc. And so if there's a place that can provide them with clean needles in exchange for used needles, the used needles can be disposed of correctly, then the clean needles, hopefully the people using drugs will use those, not share them, and potentially decrease the spread of any bloodborne viruses such as hepatitis C and HIV. So that's the thinking behind syringe exchange programs. There's also safe consumption sites. There's none in Hungary. There's some in Germany, some in the Netherlands. As I'm sure most of us know, Insight is the famous one in North America that is known of worldwide, definitely in the harm reduction world. But then there's a variety of other harm reduction practices that go beyond just injecting drug use. So actually CARBC put up this great cartoon yesterday about on their social media about what harm reduction means. Maybe harm reduction is, if I'm a compulsive gambler or I spend lots of money when I'm feeling stressed, then I freeze my credit cards in the freezer and then I can't access them right away. So that's a harm reduction technique. I'm reducing harm to myself. So thinking about harm reduction in kind of these wider ways, maybe I practice harmful attitudes, practices, how do I reduce those harms? In the context of where I did my research, harm reduction was primarily thought of as syringe exchange programs, giving clean needles in exchange for used ones so people would hopefully decrease the spread of bloodborne viruses. And it's all about meeting people where they're at. So not saying, all right, you come and we'll give you these clean syringes, but eventually you have to stop. Ideally, abstinence is one end of the spectrum of harm reduction, but some people are not able to quit or cannot quit or don't want to quit for a variety of reasons, and it's quite complex. So with harm reduction, it's about looking at where someone is at in their lives and responding to them effectively without fear of judgment. So where I did my research was in Budapest, Hungary, which is in Central Europe. See on the map right there about where it's placed. Hungary was under communist rule until 1989, and so does have that tradition of a socialist regime. In 2009, a harm reduction national drug strategy was implemented, and it was lauded as one of the most progressive ones in Europe. It was very exciting, very integrated. Then in 2010, the Conservative Party came into power, Fidesz, and the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, rejected that drug strategy and implemented a new one. In 2013, the new drug strategy rolled out, and it's been adopted with stricter penalties, including you can get penalized for consumption. So you can get penalized for having drugs, for selling drugs, but even if you don't have drugs on you, if you consume them, you can be arrested or given a fine. And the goal of the government is to eradicate all illicit drugs by 2020. So they have 5 years to do this. Good luck to them. To say the least, it's a hostile environment for harm reduction centers because mainstream thinking is that harm reduction centers are encouraging drug use. Now they're not. People are going to use drugs regardless of whether centers are there to help them or not. But overall, I find with my research that Hungary is not the most supportive. So where I decided to do my research was in the capital in Budapest, in a place called the 8th District. So Hungary's broken up, or Budapest is broken up into different types of districts, different areas. And where I did my research is not the same, but there definitely were similarities between the downtown east side and where I did my research. The injecting drug scene isn't as open as it is in the downtown east side, but there's high rate of poverty, high rate of drug use, relatively open drug use. Is also a high concentration of minorities. And in Hungary, the majority of minorities are Roma people or Gypsy people. So just some explanation about this, because I didn't really understand before I moved over to Europe. Roma is the politically correct term of what to call the group of people that I'm speaking about. And then the more colloquial term is Gypsy. And in my research, people identified as Gypsies. So I guess it's comparable to saying First Nations or Indigenous or Indian, depending on what the people themselves identify as, versus someone, I'm not Gypsy, I'm not Roma, depending on what I decide to call the other group. And it's unknown where Roma Gypsies originally come from, but it's thought that people have migrated from the northwest of India around the 11th century. And then today there's some 12 million living throughout the world, and around 8 million live in Europe. So it's the largest and most widely dispersed of many minority people. And that's Hancock who said that. And there's a history of persecution with Roma people, and that includes in World War II, where along with Jewish people, Roma were also persecuted and were murdered because of being Roma. So in kind of the same way that there's different types of systematic discrimination of different minorities in North America, if we can think about disproportionate amount of Black people that are in prison, disproportionate amount of First Nations people that maybe struggle with different health issues, it's similar to the Roma population in Europe, especially in Hungary. Up until the 1990s, it was acceptable to use the term gypsy crime to discuss any crimes that were committed by people who are of Roma origin. So I hope that gives some kind of context about the environment in which Roma people live in Hungary. So the neighborhood and where I did my research, these are some photos that the participants took during the research project. The photo on the left is an empty lot that was close to the harm reduction center, and you can see there's lots of garbage in there. And then the photo to the right is the front of the harm reduction center.
Can you move closer to the mic, please?
Oh, sorry. The floating voice. Sorry. So if you see the photo on the right, there's a window on the left-hand side and a dark door on the right. That's the harm reduction center where I did my research. I know the photos look quite dark, and this is how the participants took the photos. They chose to take it in black and white and to show the garbage because it's a dirty place. It is a dark place. And as one participant said, well, my world is very dark. It's very black and white, and so I want the photographs to reflect that. So in this particular area, there's a high insular rate of injecting drug users. They don't tend to leave or go outside of the area of the 8th district, which the specific area they were in was about a 2-block radius. It was quite small. And of course, that's not homogeneous with everyone who lived there, but the harm reduction center that I interacted with did seem to find that people interacted in that very small area. So the Harm Reduction Center, where I conducted my research, is an NGO that opened in this neighborhood in 2006. And they opened as a response to what they saw the needs of the local population. They saw that there were lots of injecting drug users, that the majority of the injecting drug users in this area were Roma, and they were getting no health care. Due to stigmatization, they wouldn't access any health services. Due to stigma of Roma in general and injecting drug users, that combined medical care wasn't going to happen. So the Harm Reduction Center isn't a medical center. It's a needle or syringe exchange program, but it does offer a variety of other services and does offer referrals to different doctors that the Harm Reduction Center has made partnership with. So the photo on the right is a shot of the syringe exchange program before it opens. You can see the red stool in the center there. To the right, there's a bunch of boxes of different syringes, and to the left are different materials, syringes, tourniquets, snacks. And then on the left-hand side here, this is an administration sheet that the harm reduction workers would fill out during the day, every day. And the larger section there of names, those are all code names of the different clients. So it was an anonymous service. Clients didn't have to provide their real name, which they felt was very important to have this low threshold access in order to gain clients. So we see the clients' names on the left, and then in the center, if you can see all the way down, it primarily says 8, and that's because that was the 8th district. That's where most of the clients lived. So they are responding to the needs of a very local population. While there are some clients who live in surrounding centers, we see 110, 19, 113. Primarily, they were responding to the needs of the local population. So at the time when I did this research, the center had more than 3,500 registered clients in 2013, and over 80% of them lived in the local area. Many clients lived in unstable living situations, including homelessness. This was not a safe injection site. Like I said, that's not legal at the moment in Hungary, and based on the political climate, is unlikely to be legal. The goal of this harm reduction center was to provide complex protection of the interests in the long term to promote change in attitudes in society. An important element for them was a professional approach to addictions where they do not differentiate between users of illegal and legal drugs. So if clients were using legal drugs, including alcohol and tobacco, and wanted help with that, the center would also help them. So this is the context of the overall center where I did my research, and then I focused on a once-a-week Women's Only Day. And if you translate the name from Hungarian to English, the title of this Women's Only Day was called Change for Chicks, which I think has a nice ring to it. So we can see on the left is the decorations of the Change for Chicks Day during a Christmas party that they held. They decorated with nice red tablecloth, put out some flowers and candles, and then in the far back right corner, you can just make out some pink bags, and those were grab bags that they gave away to the women-identified clients at this Christmas party. And once a week, this Women's Only Day would decorate, but they did try and do special occasions, like for the birthday party celebrating the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year anniversary of the Women's Only Day being open, as well as in Christmas. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a sign out front at an angle on the right to that photo, and it says, Chicks Day, today, women, ladies only. And chicks and ladies are the same word in Hungarian. They put that sign up once a week to alert the male clients that today only women can come in. They would lock the front door, and you'd have to ring the front door or knock the front door to be let in, and it was a constant back and forth of, can we come in today? No, it's Women's Day. Well, when does it stop being Women's Day? Well, at the end of today. Then tomorrow you can come. And what was great is it was low threshold, so it was people who identified as women. So there were a few transgender clients that did access the center and talked about how safe they felt with this space. So this Women's Only Day opened up in 2010, and it's the only one of its kind in Hungary. And I think that's really important to emphasize, because coming from Canada, gender-integrated services are relatively common. If not implemented, then we know best practice gender-integrated services are really important. So the fact that this was the only one of its kind of all of Hungary is quite spectacular, in my opinion. It started as bi-monthly, and then after they received extra external funding from international sources, they were able to do it once a week, and they had around 40 to 50 clients every week. They provided a range of services. The syringe-exchange program was the entry point, but they also had internet access, used clothing and shoes, pregnancy tests, snacks, condoms, a hepatologist, a lawyer, both of which were female, hepatitis C and HIV testing, one-to-one counseling, and also ladies' magazines, so the women could feel comfortable in this female-only space. And they really did gender the space, which I found quite interesting, through the decorations of flowers, ladies' magazines, encourage women if they wanted to put on makeup there, they could. So there's already a stigma of being an injecting drug user. There's the additional stigma of being Roma. And then a lot of these women that access the center were also sex workers. So we're talking about a triple threat of stigma that these clients are interacting in their daily lives in. So the point of the Change for Chicks Day was to have a safe space for women to come, get clean needles, but also that point of entry to be able to talk, what's going on in their lives, what kind of change they need, what kind of help they need. So why they did this was they realized that their their women-identified clients weren't accessing the center all that much on their own. It was primarily men who were accessing the harm reduction center prior to 2010, and if women were accessing, they were accessing in the company of a male partner, whether that be a friend, romantic, etc. And that they knew that many of the female clients were sex workers but weren't talking about their needs because it's quite taboo. So the workers at the Harm Reduction Center did some research and found that, surprise, gender-sensitive programming is helpful and effective in accessing harder-to-reach populations, such as women injecting drug users who are also sex workers. So they decided to implement this day, and since then have found great results with intake of more women coming, being more likely to talk about issues, and then developing like a peer sex workers group where they talked about safety while being on the street and doing their work, etc. So they did see a great change in a short amount of time by implementing this Women's Only Day. So for order to me to engage with this Women's Only Day and engage with this research from a feminist theory point of view, where I hope to kind of switch the power dynamics away from an unequal distribution of me as the researcher and them as the participants, I use this method called participatory action research, and specifically use photovoice, which essentially is where you give cameras to the participants and ask them to take photos of their experiences, their lives. Then we worked together in different workshops, interviews, group meetings, and talked about why did they take the photos, what do they mean, what significance do they have to them. And we did this over 8 months. It was very action-oriented as well, so at the end of it, the point is that you're supposed to benefit the research population in some way, not just take the data, leave, thanks, I'll get my PhD, you have fun. It's supposed to be more than that. So what the participants and I, which were both the clients of the Women's Only Day and the workers of the Women's Only Day, is we did a public photo exhibition. So these are some photos from the public photo exhibition. You can see the two left photos. On the top is up close of one of the photos, and on the bottom is how the photos were hung from the ceiling of the center where we did the exhibition. In the middle, we have a police tree. So they're all police-themed photos hanging from a tree. And on the right corner is another shot from far away of the different photos. So if you can see that kind of checkered pattern, those are photos that are hanging up. And then below is a cake, because it was also the 4th birthday of the Women's Only Day being open. So it was a celebration. It was an exhibition to show and make visible this invisible center and this invisible Women's Only Day, as well as it was a fundraiser. So for about $20 Canadian, if you donated that amount, then as a thank you, you were able to take one of the photographs home with you. We raised about 430 Canadian dollars, and to put this in context, the rent for both the harm reduction center where the syringe exchange program happened and the counseling center next door was about $170 a month. So we raised a fair amount of money. It was a wonderful celebration and a great way to end 8 months of really intense research with some absolutely incredible people. What I think was most wonderful about this was at a quite popular nightclub in central Budapest. And so, of course, we had friends and family come, but also lots of members of the public because it was on a Friday night. It was quite popular. And so the women who took these photos, both the clients and the workers, were able to be visible promoters of change, of saying, this is the work that we do, these are the conditions that we live in, don't shy away from it. So it was quite a fantastic night. And if you'd like any more information about the type of method I use, I'm happy to talk to you about it. But I think now what I'll do is shift to the photographs, because those are the interesting part, and just kind of talk about each one and why maybe it's relevant to harm production or harm reduction. So this is a photo of a light pole outside, and it says Sosivan on it, which is Romanesque for how are you? And it's a particular type of Romanesque that's spoken in the area. So like First Nations languages, Romanesque is quite diverse and changes based on where you live. As I mentioned, most of the clients at the Women's Only Day identified as Gypsy. And what I like about this photograph and why it was taken, I think, it was taken by one of the workers, was it shows the cultural sensitivity of the workers. This is primarily Roma clients, and the workers were primarily Hungarian, so not Roma. You can be Hungarian and Roma, but they didn't identify as Roma. It also shows that the Women's Only Day, while the needle exchange entry was, the first point of contact, it was asking about, how are you? What's going on? You seem a bit down. Has something happened? How's your living situation? What's happening? And that dialogue between workers and clients was really key. Obviously, the syringe exchange program is important for the decrease of bloodborne viruses, but it's absolutely essential to ask the clients how they're doing, and as well how the workers were doing, because it was a stressful work environment for them. So like I said, it was really a culturally sensitive place. I found it was. This is a photo taken by one of the workers of one of the clients playing a tambourine that happened to be donated for the center. While I was there doing my research, music was played all the time, and it's this really fun gypsy music that's quite exciting, quite high energy, and really brings a good mood, I would say, and it definitely did of the clients. So on the Women's Only Day, women would dance around, play music, sing to the music that they would play on the computer, and I didn't see that during the mixed gender days, during the co-op days. And that's not to say it didn't happen, but there's a safe women's only space where this type of silliness, this type of expression could happen. So here's another photo of one of the clients dancing when one of the songs was happening, and this was a particularly hard day for her. She had some difficulties happening the day before with her life. She came and turned on the music and just danced for like half an hour. And she decided to title this photo, Take Me Into Your Life, because that moment of joy, not always, but especially with this participant, was short-lived. It was intermixed with a lot of really difficult struggles in her life. So what I found from the research was that this gendered space equaled a safe space, and hence why it's important to have this gendered-only space. Some clients told me they planned their week around this Women's Only Day and wished that it would happen more than once a week. So this photograph is titled Songs from the 8th, because it's the 8th district is where the research took place. And you can see there a pair of shoes, some nail polish, and I think what's a broken umbrella. We had a lot of discussion about what that pink hook was in the top middle there. The reason I brought this photo up, it was taken by a participant, was to kind of highlight the unsafe injecting conditions in which the clients operated. It was often dirty attics and basements that were unprotected, not insulated, full of every type of excrement, etc., vomit, dirt, very unhygienic conditions, and this is where a lot of the clients were injecting. And the reason that we knew this was because the Harm Reduction Center would go day to day and clean up used syringes in the area. So you could call a number if you found syringes, and the Harm Reduction Center would go and clean them up. Or they'd walk around this 2-block radius, enter into apartment buildings, go up to the attic, go down to the basement, and find syringes. So these were really unsafe conditions for injecting, far from ideal and far from what a lot of harm reduction manuals recommend. As well, a lot of these places were where clients lived. Like I said, a fair amount of them were homeless or had unstable housing, lived in shelters. And it made it even more difficult that when I was there, Hungary decided to criminalize homelessness. So they changed their constitution to basically say that sleeping in any sort of public park, sleeping in any sort of national heritage site, which is a lot of Budapest, is illegal, and you can get an administrative fine. Well, if you live on the street, you probably don't have the money to pay for an administrative fine. So if those fines block up to over a certain amount, then you get put into jail. You're not given any stable housing support when you're in jail, so when you leave, you're back in the same conditions. So this pushed a lot of people to live in the forests, to be more hidden about where they lived and how they lived, try and living in the shelters, but as you can imagine, the shelters were quite overcrowded because of these conditions. And that's not to say there isn't housing in Budapest. There is. There's a lot of undeveloped space, or space that could be renovated and isn't. So I saw from the workers that it was quite frustrating that a lot of their clients had such unstable living conditions while trying to go about their day-to-day lives. This is a series of photographs that the workers took of the clients' purses, and they titled it "Bags of Deep Secrets." So we can see in this photograph that there's a large amount of used syringes in the bag that the client had collected over a number of days that weren't all hers. There were other people's as well. And she deposited them all in the Badella, which is the name of the safety deposit box, and where you can put all your used needles, and they'll make sure that they'll be disposed of correctly. What's interesting about this is that because of limited funding, the Harm Reduction Center could only give a maximum of 15 syringes out a day per client. So even though there's far more than 15 in this photograph, she could only get 15 in return. This is problematic because the majority of the drugs that clients were using are what is known as new psychoactive substances, or designer drugs, sometimes known as legal highs. They have a number of different names to them. And basically, it's a combination of different synthetic drugs that change year to year, depending on how they're classified in the country. So the content and the purity of the drugs that the clients were injecting were largely unknown. And the clients reported that they injected about 10 to 15 times a day, which is much more frequent than when we think about, for example, heroin users. So a lot of syringe exchange programs and harm reduction programs have been developed in response to heroin injection. So we think about opioid substitution therapy, which means you can take something that will help block the craving of heroin. That doesn't exist with new psychoactive substances. There's nothing developed that you can have a substitute for what you're injecting, especially if you don't know what it is. And in Hungary, it's illegal to test these drugs, so there's no way of finding out other than self-reporting from the clients. So since there's no long-term evidence about best practice on new psychoactive substances because they're new and developing, it was really hard for the workers to develop and implement effective harm reduction practices beyond simply syringe exchange programs. And I don't mean to diminish the syringe exchange programs, but for example, if a client needs more than 15 syringes and reacts differently week to week based on the content and the purity of the drug, as a harm reduction worker, what do you do? You know, it was quite limited, I think. This is another photograph from the series of Bag of Deep Secrets. We can see the Durex Love condoms on the right-hand side, the woman's wallet up on the left there, that white rectangle shape. And on the front left, you can see a plastic bag with blue-green trim on it, and that's a plastic bag from the Harm Reduction Center with clean syringes in them. So what is interesting, I think, about this photo and what the feedback was from the interviews I did with the people who took this photo as well as the other participants in my research was you can tell that this person's a sex worker, because on the Women's Only Day, sex workers were able to get more condoms than non-sex workers. And it was only during the Women's Only Day that they handed out condoms. They did this because they realized that their client base, the men were not responsible for using condoms, for having condoms. It was the women's responsibility, and so it would be a waste of resources if they gave them on the other days, which is very interesting, obviously. What was neat when I talked to the workers about this photo is they said it's quite a dichotomy, this photo. You can see the outline of the bag. It looks like a designer handbag, whether it is or not, of course I don't know. But on the insides, the contents are the kind of harsh reality. So walking down the street, you might see a woman carrying this bag and think nothing of it, or think a certain thing about her based on the fact that she's carrying a designer handbag. But the contents speak to a very different lived reality than what she's trying to present to herself. This photograph, called Recognition of Change, is a photograph of 3 hepatitis C, and 3 HIV saliva testing kits. This was another first for Hungary. The Harm Reduction Center was the first of their kind to have saliva testing kits for both of these bloodborne diseases, which is really great for a number of reasons. You don't need to take blood, and when the center used to do that, they'd have to send it off to a lab. It would take weeks. There's a lot of disconnect between the tests and the result. It's quick. It only takes 20 minutes, and then the clients can see the results. And you can see on the gray test in the far right corner and in the upper left corner, there's 2 lines, and that shows that those 2 clients are hepatitis C positive. It was estimated that over 80% of the clients had hepatitis C in the area, which is a very high amount. Interestingly, it didn't seem to spread to the rest of the local population. And while I was doing my research, none of the clients were tested positive for HIV, which was obviously great that there was no HIV positive clients. However, after I finished my field work, one of the male clients did test positive for HIV. This is another series of photos about police. So if we see the car out there to the right, it says police in Hungarian, rendőrség. And on the left, you can see a stop and search or stop and frisk. I don't remember what it's called in Canada. Basically where the police are searching the people who are on the street there. These are 2 Roma male clients who are on the street. And what the workers told me is most often the clients get administrative fines, not because of drugs, but because they don't have ID on them. So you need to have a government-issued ID on you at all times when you're in Hungary, whether that be a driver's license or just a registered ID. A lot of clients do not have this ID, and so they get an administrative fine for it. And like I said, once those fines build up, you have enough of them, then you can go to jail. There doesn't need to be any reasonable cause to stop and search people. And this, what we're seeing here, this corner is right outside of the Harm Reduction Center. We can see the bars from the Harm Reduction Center up in the foreground here. And constantly, police were stopping there and stopping and searching people who were hanging out on the corner. Interestingly, I think when the harm reduction workers would go out there, who were white Hungarians, and would go out for a cigarette, they wouldn't get stopped. It would just be the Roma clients. So, like I said, there's a lot of racism against Roma people in Hungary. And what some clients told me is they felt it was an attack over their own neighborhood. They didn't feel safe. So unfortunately, rather than the police being an ally with the Harm Reduction Center, with the clients, they worked against them in a lot of ways. This is another photo in the series, and it was titled The Order of Disorder. And this is a police car blocking a sidewalk and the entrance to a bakery. That's about a block away from the Harm Reduction Center. One of the workers took this photo, and she said she took it because she felt it was so typical of the response of the police in the area. So a lot of the police in this area in Budapest often didn't live in the neighborhood or even live in Budapest, but lived in the countryside and then would come in for their work. So they didn't necessarily know the context, know the area, or if they did, they knew the stereotype, gypsy junkies, which of course is not necessarily helpful when you're trying to work with the population instead of against them. So there was a lot of discussion about the police being a source of stress and anxiety and being a symbol of state repression, unfortunately, rather than being somebody who would work with the Harm Reduction Center. But this wasn't the only barrier that the Harm Reduction Center faced. There was also repression from the local government that unfolded while I was doing my research. So this photograph, ironically called A Sunny Saturday Morning, shows the front of the Harm Reduction Center with two posters out front. The poster on the right says the Needle Exchange Center has 87.2% of clients live in the local area. And then the poster on the right, hung above the window, is a quote from the local district's mayor saying we will give 10 million forints, which is about $45,000 Canadian dollars, to clean up and give waste disposal for the syringes that are around the area. And he was quoted that in early 2013. The reason that these posters were put up is because this is the morning that there was a protest that happened in front of the Harm Reduction Center. And this protest started to build momentum a few months before when the news reported that there was a used syringe in a playground. Now, of course, nobody wants to see a used syringe in the playground. Nobody wants children handling used syringes. A child did not handle one, but the media decided to blow it up, and the local government responded by saying, well, we can't have this harm reduction center in the area because clearly they're the ones giving the needles, causing the problems. What about the children? Save the children. Always a good ploy. And so from there, the Harm Reduction Center was kicked out of the local drug coordination area for the council. So that means they were no longer in communication with other services that dealt with drug users. They were isolated essentially from them. And then a protest came way a few months later. It was interesting with the protests because about 50% of the people there were very against the Harm Reduction Center, wanted it closed down, wanted the syringe exchange program to be closed down. And the other 50% said, no, this is what the local population needs. We need to keep this open and we need to give them more support. It was a very stressful time for the workers who already didn't have local funding, now didn't have local political support, and were trying to just do their job day to day. So what does this result in? Burnout. This is a photograph of a burnt out tram that was taken not too far from the Harm Reduction Center. We don't know why the tram burned out, but as you can see, it's quite a striking image of this burnt out tram. I think it's an interesting symbolism of both the clients who are burnt out because of their lives, because of the drugs they use, because possibly the trauma they've experienced that led them to their current drug use, and the trauma continues, as well as the workers. And unfortunately, after I finished my research in September of last year, the Harm Reduction Needle Exchange Program was forced to shut down. This was the largest needle exchange program and harm reduction center in Budapest, helped the most clients, and now there's very limited any syringe exchange program or any type of support for this local population that they served. So other facets of the harm reduction program do exist in other areas, but not in this local area. So what can we learn from these collection of photographs? I think there's some very practical policy and practice suggestions for Hungary in particular, but I'd be interested to know whether this is relevant in British Columbia or in Canada as well. One is integrated supportive harm reduction programs that are gender sensitive, housing first, and worker and client focused. So Polly Rice, Bell L, and Schultzman in 2013 wrote a great paper about how we need housing first integrated harm reduction and how that's important. And what I saw from my research is that many of the issues of harm that emerged was actually an issue of poverty and homelessness as it was of drug use. Drug use was an after effect, it wasn't the cause itself. And housing was nowhere on the agenda or in the implementation of the Harm Reduction Center because they did not have the funding and the resources, and of the local national government because it wasn't a priority for them. There needs to be sustainable funding and government support. Most of the funds for this Harm Reduction Center and this Women's Only Day was grant-based. It would only operate for 12 months. So it was a constant struggle figuring out where funding was coming from next. As well, there's been a shift in global funding for harm reduction where there's only countries in need And so, for example, Hungary is seen to be an industrialized nation, so there's less need than developing nations. That doesn't mean that these clients are in any less need, but because their GDP is high, they're not going to get the same amount of funding. And of course, government support, which did not happen at this harm reduction center, as well as police cooperation. Finally, there need to be changes in drug policy, both in Hungary and internationally. There needs to be more research about new psychoactive substances, so effective harm reduction interventions can be developed. Ideally, it would be great if there could be a safe consumption site like Vancouver's Insight that would vastly reduce the harms with injecting in Budapest. And Hungary's drug policies need to move away from this idyllic and unattainable aspiration of a drug-free country where drugs are punished and criminalized, and move towards a harm reduction approach where drug use is rooted in evidence-based research that focuses on the health of its citizens. So if you're interested to learn more about this research, I encourage you to visit this blog. It's a bilingual blog that shows all the photographs that were put up during the photo exhibition, describe more of the method, as well as some different links that have come up. There's a 25-minute video up there from the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union that gives you an overview of the 8th District, and it's really powerful. I highly recommend it. Please feel free to email me if you have any comments or questions, and now I'd like to hear from you if you see any application between what I've talked about and what happens in Victoria and British Columbia. So thank you.